Kurze Ankündigung auf Deutsch, weil die heutige Episode auf Englisch sein wird. Ich hatte die große Ehre, Jurgen Appelo zu interviewen, bekannt von seinen Büchern Management 3.0, Managing for Happiness und ein, zwei anderen Büchern. In der heutigen Episode wird es aber vorrangig um Organisationsdesign und Organisationsentwicklung gehen. Er ist jetzt mittlerweile bekannt für das unFIX-Modell, einer willkommenen, wie ich finde, Alternative zu den anderen skalierten Frameworks wie Less Safe, Scrum of Scrum und Spotify. Viel Spaß beim Zuhören. Hi everyone, please get ready to embark on a management revolution. Today, I have the great honor of welcoming Jurgen Appelo, a big force in the world of leadership and innovation. You might know Jurgen from his game-changing book, Management 3.0, which I'm just holding in the camera right now, which rewrote the rules of traditional management, or Managing for Happiness. I just told Jurgen how surprised I am among the 50 to 100 books that I brought to New Zealand. That's definitely two of them. And even his last book, Managing for Happiness, Seth Godin labeled it practical and fun, which an honor. But hold on, Jürgen's journey doesn't stop there. Besides working on new books, also a novel, it will be his longest book ever. He created the unFIX model, which is the reason why we are speaking today. It's all about embracing change and agility. But here's the twist. He's not your typical suit and tie guru. As you can see, he's wearing a really neat shirt. Jürgen is known for his quirky humor and unique take on management. So buckle up and join us because we are in for an exciting ride filled with insights and maybe even a quirky joke or two. So without further ado, let's welcome Jürgen Appelo.
All right. Thank you, Danny. Great intro. Thanks.
Thank you. I thought before we start, and I mentioned Management 3.0 and unFIX already, if someone hasn't heard about you and your books and hears your name for the first time, and our audience is mainly managers and Agile coaches, why do you think they should stay and listen? Why is it important? What's in it for the customer, so to say?
Well, maybe you already indicated that there's a lot of traditional management still out there, and I have many flaws, but one thing I do not have is being traditional. As you have noticed in my books, I haven't worn a suit and a tie for decades, and I wish to keep it that way. And because I don't think that's needed for managing systems. And yeah, I have some more progressive forward thinking ideas on how to manage organizations, lead change, and do organization design. So if that interests people, they should stick around.
And what I found interesting in your journey, you were a coder developing your own bookkeeping software that you used for a long, long time. Then you moved into management, became a senior manager, and then at some point you authored books. How the shift, like being a full-time manager, I assume you would be too busy to write books. Can you explain your journey a little bit and give us context before we get into the meat of these things?
Yeah, sure. I think the reason is that I'm a very creative person. I like making things. Whether it is illustrations, as you've seen in my first
Mhm.
books, I did the illustration myself, or writing a novel as I'm doing now, or creating logos as I've done in the past. Even my own fonts I created.
Wow.
When I was a student at a student society, I made annual books, I made posters, I did a lot of things, and programming was just one way of me of being creative, and it
Mhm.
was something that I liked very much. And also, at the time, I thought this is the way to go. This is where I should be making money in the future as a software engineer, because of course that was booming. I understood that the I wouldn't make much of a chance having good income as a cartoonist or as a or something like that. Even though I had the ambition as well to draw cartoons and things like that. So I chose software engineering because of my future perspective as a
Mhm.
career. But my interests were far too broad to just stick to programming. I also like making companies as a creative thing,
Mhm.
starting up a company and creating a business model and figuring out what people are willing to pay for me, that's a creative effort. So my interests were far too broad to stick to software engineering. And that meant that I was falling behind because the people, the guys and some girls who focused on that were much better because they
Yeah.
did it full time and I only did it part time. So I thought, you know what, I should just give this up because I do coding for fun. I cannot keep up with the more serious people. I like all the other creative things. So and I'm a generalist,
Mm.
and that's how I ended up managing because I made courseware in the past. I I did classes in the 90s. People migrated from WordPerfect to Microsoft Word and from Lotus 123 to Microsoft Excel. That was a big thing in the 90s. I helped people do programming in those environments. And I wrote courses for that and gave classes. And that's when I figured out, I like this generalist approach. And that's
Yeah.
how I ended up being a manager of software engineers instead of doing the programming myself.
Hmm. And it's thank you. And it's you can definitely see in the progression of your books and definitely in Managing for Happiness how much more colorful your books and the playfulness that you bring, especially also with the unFIX model to the table. I really love that, especially when I look around in my room. Maybe Alexander Osterwalder with Business Model Canvas or some design thinking books are similarly playful, but most of the management books, especially on strategy, they're like, oh, the best thing is maybe the cover, but it's otherwise black and white.
Very dull indeed. Yeah. Very boring. So I negotiated that with the publisher, with Wiley, when I published Managing for Happiness. I said, I want a full color book because I want to express the colorfulness
Mhm.
of management and leadership. This should be the unique selling point that this is a colorful management book. So I won that fight. Sadly, it could then not be a hardcover, which is what I also wanted. They said you could
Mm.
choose either hardcover or color, and then I chose color. Yeah, that's how I approach my job. I want it to be as playful and colorful as possible to also make it stand out from the usual dreck that
Yeah.
is that is bland and gray and dark.
Yeah. And you mentioned being an entrepreneur is a highly creative endeavor. And what I found interesting studying your profile um, is that you tried to write a book in 2008 or seven, and you learned a lot, but it didn't end up as a book. And then at some point you started a blog. Um, would you mind explaining this journey? And then it led to a book itself. And I think it's especially for me and maybe other wannabe entrepreneurs, it's an interesting point to notice that sometimes we try to jump too far and get to the product in itself without maybe doing the extra work of a year or two or however long it takes to build a community, get feedback. In your case, it was a blog and really refining thoughts, refining writing skills, which all, I guess, led to you becoming a really good writer and then publishing your first book.
Yeah, yeah. So that's actually, I think, a very interesting point that I had to learn over time. I tried writing a novel once a long time ago. It was early 2000s. I wrote one chapter out of a larger idea for a novel that I had in mind, and I perfected that chapter. I made it as good as I could, very readable. Actually, I participated in a contest at the time, a science fiction and fantasy writing contest here in the Netherlands, and I came out number 4 out of 100 people or something, and that
Wow.
annoyed me because I was the first loser. Because the number 1, 2, and 3 got a prize, and the number 4 didn't. So that was a bit of a bummer. Um, but I learned from that I went about it the wrong way because when I wanted to continue with other chapters, I noticed that I had to change the chapter I had already written. because other things had to be done elsewhere in the book that led to changes in the thing that I already done. And so I thought, look, this is not working for a novel. If you just perfect one chapter, you put it out, and then you start working on the next one. It is as if you make a movie one scene at a time.
Mm,
And then when it's finished and polished and all the actors have done their job, you're going to think about, okay, what is the next scene going to be about? That would be a terrible way
yeah.
of filming a motion picture. So I learned from that, and then I thought, I need the feedback cycle for a book, and that's when I started blogging in 2007 or eight.
Mhm.
I remember well, because I wanted people to give me feedback on my writing, and I wanted to acknowledge that what I had written should remain a draft. It should be out there so that people can respond to it, but I have to understand that this is only the first version and I will
Mhm.
have to iterate on it. So indeed, I started a blog, I got feedback on it. And actually the feedback from people on my blog helped me to focus on management and leadership because I had much bigger plans for my book about complexity science and systems thinking and software engineering, and half the universe would be included in the book.
Yeah.
And people said, yeah, all that's very interesting, but what is most relevant for us is the management and leadership stuff because there's very little written on that. And then I thought, okay, well, then that should be my niche. I should focus on that.
Mhm.
So the feedback cycle helped me in that project to get focus in where I didn't have it yet. And also that helped me to rewrite what I had with the focus on management and leadership. And then 3 years later, this became my first book, Management 3.0. And I think one third or half of the book was blog posts that I had already written in draft
Mhm.
version and then updated and rewrote
Mhm.
for the book. But the book was published as one thing. I did not publish the chapters individually as finished
Yeah.
pieces because I had learned from my earlier experiment that that doesn't work when you write a book in general.
And one really nice thing to note about that book for me is as you explained, the customer centricity on the one hand. It's a 2, 3 year process in the making of blog posts, refining ideas, adding more to it. And then also adding them to the book themselves, right? The feedback that you received of, hey, I'm not alone here. There's a community behind me that contributed to these kind of insights. I
Yeah,
really like that.
yeah. Actually, some people responded to my blog posts that were mentioned in the book because they gave me some interesting insights.
Yeah.
That, of course, is different when you write a business book compared to a novel because I don't have that approach. I don't blog about my novel, which makes it more difficult to have a
Mm.
feedback cycle there because you can basically only have that feedback cycle with yourself and with maybe a trusted circle of friends and editors. But you don't put out your main plot points and surprises on a blog. So, well, I plan to have a surprise in the book at that at this point. That makes no sense.
Yeah.
So you destroy the whole experience if you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. While writing a novel.
Why write a novel? I wanted to write a novel since I was 15, I think.
Wow.
I love
That's
science
cool.
fiction and fantasy. I have a huge bookcase around the corner here in the other room, full of sci-fi and fantasy. So I wanted to write my own book at some point. So business books is sort of a sidetrack, a sort of a roundabout way of realizing my dream, which is to be a novelist.
I would definitely check it out once it's out. I must admit, I probably 98% of my books are business books, non-sci-fi. So
Okay.
that clearly shows my interest over the years. But on Kindle, I have a few books as well. But getting into Management 3.0, I was wondering, as it was your first book, I also must admit it's a bit different from your writing style over the years. As we said, from the playfulness, it seems a bit more scientific. You're referencing a lot of research and papers. Um, and coming from it from a more science and a research angle. And if you had to rewrite it, what wouldn't make it into the book? What thoughts have you changed since 2011 that you thought back then, man, they are set in stone. I would never change them, but time has proven to be different.
Oh, that's a difficult one. Indeed, I had a popular science angle. I'm not a scientist myself.
Mhm.
I like science and pop science and all the resources that I use were often scientifically informed, because I want to give it more solid foundation than just my own opinion on everything. So that was important to me. But to be honest, I don't think there is anything that I would take out. There are probably things that I would improve a bit. Like I changed my opinion on some words, like the word failure, for example. Is one example of more nuanced way of thinking about wording, because the word fail has a negative connotation in
Mm.
many organizations. So I totally understand why people say, um, uh, um, you only fail when you give up, fail fast, fail early, or things like fail forward, create a safe to fail environment, and so on. But what managers hear and executives hear is the word fail, fail,
Mhm.
fail all the time, and they don't like that word. So what people mean is when you try things, it is expected that many of your experiments lead to a negative outcome. So the outcome is not what you want, but that does not mean that the experiment has failed.
Mhm.
The result is not a failure. And so that is a more nuanced way of using terminology. I would now say you must run experiments and you have positive outcomes and negative outcomes, or desirable and undesirable, that will help you redo your experiments and learn. Um, but you only fail when you stop running experiments.
Mhm.
You only fail when your experiment blows up in your face because the experiment was dangerous. Or you fail when your experiment has bankrupted your company. Then you fail. So I think the word fail has to be used for things that management would also recognize as a failure, which is blowing up the company or hurting people, whatever, the things you don't want to happen as a result of your experiments. But the
Mhm.
fact that some of the outcomes are negative, that's not failure. That is expected. It is part of the scientific process that you have to expect some negative outcome. So I have not been careful enough, maybe with some of the language, some of the terminology that I've used in my earlier books, but that is learning. I mean, I've been in this business now for 20 years. I have fine-tuned the way I talk and write and gotten better at something. So probably I would reword a couple of things that I wrote in the
Mhm.
first.
And in episode 22, Heiko, my co-host, and I, we discussed the impact on language, especially of English terms and concepts, especially Agile terms and concept in the German word or in a German work environment. Oftentimes, unlike the French, we are not translating words like email or inbox, and we're taking them for granted. And oftentimes, when you do the Agile transformations, you encounter resistance to change just from a language perspective because it's not been translated in the local language. And in Management 3.0, I love how you wrote, to give you some credit of how aware you were about language and the usage of language. You said people are not uh, thermostats. We should use terms like lead, inspire, constrain, govern, help. What's the role of language and how important is it in your experience?
Well, I think language is important. It's a funny thing that you pointed out because indeed we borrow words from other languages. Like in Germans have used borrowed the words handy, for example, for a mobile phone, which is an English word, but nobody else in the world calls it a handy. Only people in Germany call it a handy. In English, they have no idea what you're talking about. Same with beamer. By the way, we do that also in the Netherlands. The projectors, we call them beamers. But if you
Mm,
use the word beamer with an English speaking person, they have no idea what you're talking about because they call them projectors.
mhm,
So language is a funny thing. We borrow words in the wrong way. We give them a different meaning, and so on. I had one conversation once with someone on a panel about the the name of the HR department that
mhm,
where I suggested that they should rename themselves to people support or something like that, or people development. And another person on the panel disagreed with me. She said, "There's nothing wrong with human resources. I mean, that's
oh,
what we do." This, and I mean, no matter if everything else remains the same, if whatever you do is the same, the way you present yourself with your name will have an impact on people.
mhm,
I think it makes a difference whether you call yourself human resources or people support. That means that some people are going to expect something from you in terms of your behaviors. So yes, I do think this is important. We have to think about what words we use, and I'm a creative person, so I like playing with language, which is also why I came up with the word unFIX. I'm sure we're going to talk about that a bit later. Management 3.0 and other brands that I have come up with because it's a creative thing. I try to figure out what word can I use that has a positive feeling, creates the impact that I want with the
mhm.
letters and the syllables that I choose. That's a creative effort, but I'm a writer. I think about these things.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I, I'd say as an agile coach, I'm very observant of how clients, teams, organizations use language too, because oftentimes it, even though they are subtle or nuanced ways, but you can pick up how they think about doing business. So if you use military war language, it's all about competition in a complex environment where maybe partnerships and collaborations should be more brought to the surface. So, and then, you can hear these when people go into a battle or tackle each other with feedback. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's where I pick up nuances from language.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. And also, what comes up often is changing your language depending on which people you talk
Mm,
with. For example, I just use the word experiment because I assume you understand what I mean when I talk about running experiments, and that is the way that scientists and researchers think, which is what we discussed earlier. But higher management often doesn't like the word experiment because it makes them think of scientific labs and research and just all
no
the
progress. And
money pits that you throw the money in and nothing ever comes out of it, and etc. What they do like is the word bet. They like betting on the financial market. They like betting in
mm,
casinos. They like betting on football matches or whatever. Anyone with a financial mindset has an idea that betting is an interesting thing. So investors, venture capitalists, etc., they bet all the time on the startups that they finance. But a bet is the same as an experiment. It is
mhm,
something that you offer a budget for and for which you do not know whether there'll be a return on investment. It is mathematically, it's the same thing. So for some people, you can use the word experiment. For others, you can use the word bet, depending on which people you are talking with.
mm. When you mentioned unFIX already, and in my research, I heard that the first beta version, I think you published it in September 21 and more officially in 22. So it's a very recent, not framework, model? How would I call it?
Pattern library. I call it pattern library.
Why do you call it pattern library, and why do you call it unFIX?
Well, I like using the comparison with Lego. Lego doesn't mandate any specific block, a Lego block that you
Mm,
need to use, even though there are 4,000 different pieces or different types of Lego blocks. None of them are mandatory. And with pattern libraries, that's the same thing. They're just uh, collections of options. Liberating Structures and Sociocracy 3.0 and several others are also pattern libraries. They do not mandate anything. They just offer suggestions of things you could try. Uh, that makes it not a framework, because framework, that's the word itself,
mm,
that contains the word frame, and a frame is something that is static, a static structure that keeps everything together. That is what the word frame implies in the
mm,
English language. So every time someone refers to unFIX as a framework, I tell people, no, it's not a framework, because there is no frame.
mm,
There's nothing that holds everything together. All the bits and pieces are optional. Now, of course, some are more obvious than others. Like some Lego blocks you practically use in every Lego model out there. The basic 2x4 block, it is so standard. It is
yeah.
probably part of almost every Lego set. But other Lego pieces are very specialized and very unique. You need them in only very rare cases. It's the same with a pattern library. So that's the difference between a pattern library versus a framework. A framework is one thing that you
Mm,
install, you implement it, and then you can change bits and pieces. You can move things in and out of the frame. Like a bicycle also has a frame. I know a lot about bikes because I'm Dutch. We have more
yeah.
bicycles than people here in this country. So we know bicycles have frames because the frame holds the bike together.
Mhm,
So yeah, that's what unFIX is about. And I started with patterns for organizational design because I thought that the frameworks, such as SAFe and Lesson, Holacracy, and others, offered some suggestions, but they were not good enough, in my opinion, on how to structure a networked organization. So I found patterns that I liked across several sources, and I put them together in what I call unFIX. And the name itself, unFIX, suggests that you should decouple things, that you have to
mm,
remove the fixed structure and make it something more flexible and more versatile. That is the idea of the brand. It is literally the unframework for innovation and experience, unFIX. That is how I came up with the name. And after I did organization design, I moved on to goal setting patterns. And there are other patterns that I am publishing very soon. And then I think we have a rather complete version 2 that we're going to
mm,
use starting September to do more marketing and updated training materials and so on.
yeah. And I or unlike the business model canvas, which is like a frame, it's a great invention, I must say. It's a great communication tool, but it puts you in that frame. I have seen case studies online, not just on your website, but generally if you Google unFIX and case studies of how these Lego blocks, and that I picture that what I do with my son next door, like you use these bricks and you put them together, and sometimes you end up with a big high structure and sometimes vertical, and it goes all different ways if you want to be creative and don't follow the manual. And I have seen these kind of case studies as well, how flexible these bricks are. And I'd love to talk a little bit about maybe a few components. I know that we would be spending another hour or two just talking about each component, but maybe you can highlight one or two, because I think on your website, unFIX, it's really well described what the model is. And I don't want to spend too much time on it because sometimes it's better be read. But I love how versatile and flexible you put these things together, and maybe you can highlight one or two.
Yeah, well, there are many. So is there any specific topic you would like to know more about? I can talk about anything you want.
That's true. Maybe we tackle, because it's interesting for the managers and the governance crew, and of course the value streams. How,
Sure.
because that's the most important thing. And yet again, we
Yeah.
explored the power of language. Why you say crew and not team or squad? Why you say forum and not chapter? I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
thoughtfulness within the pattern library, the not framework.
Yeah. Right. So, yeah. So first of all, the idea of a pattern library, and the first person to came up with the concept was Christopher Alexander, who wrote a book on patterns for urban planning and city design in, I think, the 70s of last century. And the book is called A Pattern Library. And what he did was he came up with the town square and the promenade and things like that. This familiar concept that you and I know from all cities. Every city in the world basically has a promenade and town squares and so on. So these are patterns that he observed. But what he did was he gave them a specific name that was
Mhm.
recognizable, and he gave them a number so that it would be a complete library that will make it easy for people to look up the descriptions of the patterns. So I do the same thing. I look at what I see is suggested as a good thing to do, even though people use different wording across different books and models and so on. And then I figure out, okay, what is for us a good word to use in the pattern library? So for example, the governance crew, indeed, as you pointed out, well, some people would call that the management team or the executive team or the governance circle in
Mm.
holacracy or whatever. I like the word governance because, and this ties back into Manager 3.0, that is mostly what management does. In my opinion, it sets constraints on a self-organizing system, like the government of a country
Mm.
doesn't manage everyone in the whole country. No, they let people do whatever they want, except there are a few things that you are not allowed to do and a few things that you
Right.
must do, like pay taxes.
Yeah.
And as for the rest, do whatever you like in a free democratic society, at least. And that is governance. And so I like the word governance for what the management team is supposed to do. And I prefer the word crew over team because I noticed that the word team has been a bit misused in the last few decades.
Mm.
I recently heard someone refer to their company of 15,000 people as a team. And then I thought, that's an enterprise. That's not a team for me.
Yeah.
But this is the way the word team is now used. It has been so inflated and devalued at the same time that the word has become practically meaningless. The word crew is closer to its original concept, like an airline crew or the crew on a ship. It's a team indeed with a mission to
Mm.
get something done, to get customers from one place to the other. So I thought, yeah, I like the word crew. I could have used squad or pod or cell, whatever, but that's the word that I picked. Also because it wasn't really used yet by anyone else. If I had used squad, then people would have associated unFIX with the Spotify model because that is where they use the word squad. And I wanted to break that association. The same, by the way, with the word forum. A forum is a generic word for what could be a community of practice or a guild or a center of excellence or any community that is across the enterprise
Yeah.
where people get together from various places, departments, teams, and so on, business units, to talk about a specific topic or to talk about an area of interest. It could be community of interest or community of practice, whatever. I call all of them forums. The word forum has not been used yet.
Hmm.
So I thought that makes it a neutral term. And it reminds me of the places where, like the, the European Union, where we send our representatives or we send people to talk with each other about an important topic
Yep.
and make decisions with each other. And then they bring the decisions back home and say, okay, well, we've decided on one testing framework across the whole company because using 10 different testing frameworks makes no sense. So this is going to be the default or standard. We have decided in the testing forum. This is what forums are for, in my opinion. The word goes back to the Roman
Mm.
times, where they had forums to discuss important matters. So yeah, language is an important thing. We discussed that earlier, and I try to think about the wording, the correct wording that comes with the least amount of baggage and the least amount of incorrect associations with other models and, and specific frameworks out there.
And it lends itself for the pattern library lends itself for being used in many versatile applications. So even though your background is IT, you're a coder, you would and the scaled agile frameworks that you mentioned, less say Spotify, Scrum of Scrums, like as you know better than I do, they are all having an IT background, and now we are trying to push them into businesses with all its challenges. And what I find interesting about the unFIX framework, maybe it's based on language, and I don't want to focus too much on language. I didn't even think we would focus so much on it, but I'm realizing more and more how versatile it is and freely being used as these bricks and Legos to describe an organizational design and maybe allow managers or even teams to play around with these blocks and play a little bit. And that would be a nice mention of you created a Miro template with all those, so you can play around it, or that even an application for just us to play around what it means to design an organization. And it's not meant just for IT. It's really meant for non-government, government, NGOs, any kind of organization we can think of.
Correct. I must admit it is IT informed. I mean, some of the patterns I have borrowed from Team Topologies,
Hmm.
which is a more IT focused pattern library as well. And so some of the suggestions come from IT, but it is intended not to be an IT focused pattern library. You should be able to use this for other kinds of organizations. And then the idea is, and that's still work on our backlog as a team, that we would like to offer different examples of all the things
Hmm.
that you could be doing. Very similar to how Lego offers you many different sets of
Yep.
things you can build. You can make a fire truck, you can make a hospital, you can make a spaceship, and so on. That is how Lego is sold to people. What they use is this subsets of the large collection of 4,000 different types of Lego blocks. But nobody gets the 4,000 blocks. No
Yeah.
kid would know what to do with 4,000 blocks, different types. What they want is a specific picture of a solution that says, look, this is the spaceship that you could be building, and these are the blocks that you would need for it, with a little manual of how to make it. I
Mm.
think that is a great analogy of how I would like to approach unFIX, where specific frameworks and models, such as, for example, the Spotify model, let's take that as an example. That could be one specific instance of something that you could make with the unFIX pattern library. You would need forums, you would need value stream crews, you would need a couple of other patterns in our library, and then you can draw the Spotify model.
Hmm.
But that's just one example. And then you would use these patterns, and we could even make a little manual for you
Yeah.
for how to do that. But we could also draw something different that is more like holacracy or something, whatever you want. So I think that's important, that you start with what is the goal and the need of the organization? What kind of change do they want to make here? What do they want to build with their business, their ways of working? And then we
Mm.
should offer some predefined sets. Like, okay, well, what you need looks most like this spaceship, or it looks most like this fire truck. So maybe that could be the starting point, but realize that after making the spaceship, you can take it apart, you can change things because we have 4,000 other blocks that to make the spaceship even cooler or better. And I think that is how the pattern library distinguishes itself from its framework, because the frameworks out there are one solution. This is
Mm.
something to be implemented and something to be certified in, that you have a correct implementation and understanding of the one picture of the framework, and that's it. While actually should keep playing and keep changing the picture that you have.
And everyone who has built Lego before by manual knows how beautiful it might look as an end result and how harmful to your heart it is when the little son or daughter comes along and like destroys it and wants to start over again. And you as a parent really fell in love with the end creation. You wanted to stay like this forever and put it on the shelf as a display. And I think your hope or desire with this with unFIX is something completely else. But how could you, if we look at into management and how organizations are run these days, we fall in love with ideas, we fall in love with certain patterns, and we want them to be stable for a really long time, which is almost against what you are intending here. How to resolve this challenge that we all encounter privately or as in within organizations, that it's actually not that easy to take things apart, be playful, use it for some time, then take it apart again, and being so versatile.
Yeah, and maybe that is my own background shining through. I I remember a long time ago when I was playing with Lego with one of my cousins, little cousin. I was a couple of years older, so I had a bit more experience with Lego, and he still reminded me years later that I was building these cool spaceships out of the Lego blocks that he had, and I made this big spaceship for him, and he kept it like that for days because it was the coolest spaceship that he had ever had, that I made for him. And yeah, that's something that I did already when I was a kid, understanding that the blocks enable you to make anything you like. Then maybe is shining through in the work that I try to do now.
Yeah. And on your website, there's a lot of tips, and I'd love to look at one or two of them. One of them is long-lived stable teams. I think the emphasis here is on long-lived and stable are not the only option. And you are highlighting very beautifully that with cards and illustrations that there are other options. Um, let's talk about that tip and teams. Stability and how they are formed and maybe how they are could be dissolved or should be dissolved at some point.
Yeah, to be honest, I have been maybe that's one thing that you asked me earlier, what should I change in my earlier book? I probably have said, like many others, keep your teams together, keep them stable, because if you don't, you lose cohesion, and you have to go through those stages of forming, storming, norming, performing, the whole Tuckman model, which is unscientific, by the way, but people have the point. And I later learned that there are other options. Airline crews and hospital crews and then fire departments have shown us that you can form teams on the fly, when people have already learned how to work with each other in a slightly larger group. That
Mhm.
cannot be too big because they have to know each other. They have to practice with each other. They have to learn the same territory, like the same airplane. In the case of airline crews, they standardize on planes in the airline industry so that they can do easy reteaming across flights, where they can have different combinations of pilots and stewards, stewardesses. on any flight because they know how to operate the plane, and then
Mhm.
they know how to work with each other in various combinations. But they have a slightly larger group that I then call the turf or the base, where they do the forming, storming, norming, performing, where they get to know each other, they have trust and respect and psychological safety and so on. So I learned that you can pull these two apart, that
Mm.
the idea that we've always had in the Agile community that you have to keep your team together, that is true when you define team as the base or the turf of 20, 30, 50 people, small number that know each other on a first name basis and know how to work with each other.
Mm.
But within that slightly large team, you can make sub teams that we then call the crews that form uh, temporarily for specific missions, like a flight or a hospital operation or putting out a fire or something like that. That is how they solve that in other industries. So what we have done in the Agile community is make a very simplistic interpretation of what it means to be a stable team. And then we have drawn the incorrect conclusion that you should not take apart a team of 5 people. Well, that's not a problem if that team of 5 people is part of a larger team of 25 that knows how to work with each other in different combinations. So that is a perfect example of unfixing.
Mm.
I've unfixed the concepts of the base, the turf versus the crew. Those are different patterns. We should pull them apart. And if you do that, you suddenly see that there are different options of combining them. And indeed, I offer 4 different ways with the stable team as one perfectly valid solution. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just say that is one out of 4 different options, the stable team. But you could also have a dynamic team where people move in and out all the time, where the team stays together, where the team exists for a long time, indefinitely maybe, but team rotate in and out
The members.
across
Yeah.
different teams.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the second option. A third option would be a mission team, such as airline crews. They stay together. The team doesn't change, which is hard to do mid-flight. But they are together for only a short duration. And then the last example is the fully fluid team, like the construction crew that worked on my house last year. Every morning I was making coffee for different people because they were all specialists. They knew each other on a first name basis. They were always singing every day with the radio on, having a good time while being productive. But the set of people in that short duration of them being a team was a different combination of specialists each day because the carpenter could not do what the window maker could do and vice versa.
Mhm. And what we often see in agility land is coming from management 1.0 or 2.0 is a hierarchy, a power structure. And you have been a manager before. I'm one right now. And oftentimes managers define themselves in how many FTE they have. And they'd rather want more than less. And they want this to be a stable, if not growing number, because it's
Yeah.
ego enriching or empowering. And I think agility just took that framework and took it for granted that, okay, that's set in stone. We can't change that. And I love how unFIX gives other solutions to that problem of then I'm yet not sure how to solve the ego problem of managers or the governance crew that divisions or departments are defined by the sheer size. But I love how you approach the team angle. Yep. Do you have
Yeah,
any
my
solutions for the
suggestion.
management?
Well, first of all, I tell people my preferred approach is that indeed the managers stick to the governance crew and then stay out of everything else in the base.
Mm.
So they should not be part of the value streams, not be part of platform crews or whatever. Because as soon as they are, then you create a territory and then you it is hard to
for that
change
reason.
things. So while the whole point of unFIX is to keep things as flexible as possible, people should be able to decide for themselves that they split up a team, or that they merge teams, or that they change in any kind of structure that they think is better, without having a management permission or changing the territories of their managers. So the managers should stay in the governance crew. But then, yeah, at some point when the base gets too large, the business unit gets large, it should split. It should
Mhm.
split horizontally, instead of putting layers in between and scaling up. I think that is the main problem that organizations have introduced, that they scale upwards, that they put layers in between to make the organization larger. While you should do that horizontally and split into separate bases that collaborate with each other in a horizontal manner as a network. And I hope that this is the way forward. But it is indeed difficult when you have managers that lend their reputation and feeling of certainty and power, from the number of FTEs that they are managing in their base. That's an issue.
Yeah, and one of the, for me, powerful mantras that you shared is management is way too important to leave it to the managers to decide what to do. So it's really a job for everyone in the organization. And that might be one of the last topics I wanted to touch on, the role of management going forward. In agility land, we often say, who needs managers? We don't need managers at all. What do you think is the future of managers? How many are there in companies? Um, I would be really keen on maybe even any predictions that you see in the next 10, 20 years, um, given AI and productivity boost is probably also around the corner. Um, Not focusing on AI, but more on the management part of it. But what do you predict? Any?
Well, it's difficult to predict things in an environment that is so unstable. But the trend, I think, is that the percentage of people who are managers is going down, because indeed, well, you mentioned AI. Management is mostly a coordination thing. It is making sure that other people are able to work together, and some things have to be coordinated. And one of the ways of doing that is to make a manager a point of coordination,
Mhm.
where, for example, we
What in it?
delegate, we delegate strategy or visioning or whatever. Okay, there are a lot of things that we have to talk about in an organization. And let's
Mhm.
face it, nobody wants to do everything all the time, because you can get nothing done. And
Yeah.
a team does not want to create their own office around themselves. They don't want to waste their time purchasing their own tools, and maybe also not decide on their own salaries and things like that, because it all takes time away from the actual value adding stuff that you need to do for customers. So we intentionally delegate stuff to managers who coordinate these things for everyone. But with the advent of artificial intelligence, we can do a lot actually through machines. That coordination, for example, who gets paid how much, while in distributed autonomous organizations, they delegate this to algorithms, where how much you get paid is simply going to be a result of how much measurable input you have generated in a month. This has benefits and drawbacks, but it is one way of approaching it. And I think we're going to see more things happening like that, where what the stuff that we have traditionally seen as the management's job can be delegated to other people, either the team members themselves or specific crews like coaches helping people out with their
Mm.
one-on-ones and the performance development and so on. Why should a manager do that? I never understood the idea that a manager should have one-on-ones with everyone that are their direct support, so to speak. Yes, I do understand that people like having feedback on a personal base with someone they can trust, someone that they can confide in without uncertainties and their ambitions. But that the perfect person to do that with would not be the manager. I mean, if your ambition is to take the job of your manager, would you tell your manager that on a one-on-one? No,
Definitely.
but maybe you would share that with a personal coach or with a
Mm.
mentor or whatever, that your ambition is to climb up the management hierarchy. And yeah, you have an eye on your manager's job, actually. So you can delegate one-on-ones and personal development and so on to other people who are not managers. And the same for many things that managers traditionally see as their responsibility, delegate to team members or people whose specific job that is, coaches and whatnot, or machines, algorithms.
Mm.
Some things can be automated.
Yeah. And as you said, that working on the system and providing the right environment for crews to shine and do the value creating activities could be one of the main focus points of management going forward. And I haven't seen that much in companies because, as you know, agile transformations or any kind of change management, it's always static. You bring in a new frame, then you work in that frame, and after 3 to 5 years, companies realize this frame needs to be improved. But management doesn't see the task or as working on the system. So I like your vision for the future. I just wanted to mention um, whoever wants to know more about unFIX, the model, has a chance to meet you in person in Berlin on November 8th and 9th. You call it the unFIXcon. It's a conference. You invited quite a few speakers, 2-day event, as I said. And you will be doing a keynote, and probably you're already totally prepared and have it scripted out, what you're going to say about AI and how it's changing. I thought so. Way of working. Is there anything else you want to add to the conference other than a big invite and shout out to have a look at it and maybe a visit?
Well, the conference organized by my partners in Germany, and David and Andreas and others who do a great job, who did a great job also last year with the first unFIXcon. So I'm happy to see that we have a new edition. We call the previous version the MVP and the minimal viable product, and this time it's for real. But that aside, yes, people are very welcome to join. We're going to talk about unfixing everything in your organization. My contribution is going to be about what is indeed the impact of artificial intelligence, which is also something that I am learning about. I'm
Mhm.
not an AI specialist in any way, but I see things happening, and that is in itself interesting enough, I think. And I have a 2-day workshop just before the conference with a smaller group. So in case some people are interested in joining that, they are very welcome to do that as well. So yeah, I hope to see some people in Berlin.
Thank you, Jürgen. And where can the audience find you except the unFIXcon? What sources, links would you like to highlight, or any last requests?
My website is jurgenappelo.com. I appreciate if you add that to the show notes, but most
Sure.
important is unfix.com. That's where people will usually go to find more information.
Cool. Thank you.
Everything that our team is doing, because I'm not the only one working on this. We have a whole team involved in partnering and online learning and so on and so on. There's a lot of good stuff coming up very soon, actually.
Cool. Thank you so much. I definitely will put it in the show notes, also link to the unFIXcon. Is there anything else that you would like to add at the end? Anything that we missed?
No, I can't think of anything, to be honest. Usually when organizers are ask me what's your final suggestion, final advice, I say keep experimenting as I have done my entire life. Uh, Try shit. and see what happens. And that has resulted in some very interesting failures, but also a lot of learnings, and that made uh, a more interesting person in some case, in some context, I would say. So keep trying.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny.